This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Hear that? It's SpringFest savings calling your name. Only at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery when you buy a Select Ego trimmer, blower, or mower. Plus, get your choice of any 2 bags of Miracle-Gro organic soil mix for only $16. Shop these can't-miss deals in-store or online today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Hawaii.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
Hey all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
And welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. My name is Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm your other host, Shelby or She-Cup.
Yeah, and we are here to talk about Dragon Age. I'm so excited. We're here to talk about where it all began.
The First Blight.
The First Blight.
That's right. So we are very much in a transition period with the podcast this season. And so, as you know, if you've been listening along, you know that we have been talking all about the Darkspawn and how they came to be and all of that kind of stuff, everything to do with them. But now we're transitioning into focusing more on the blights and on the archdemons behind them. So this is where we're going to really dive into every single thing that we know about the old gods, because they're each affiliated with a blight. And so they're going to be paired together along with the blight that they correspond with. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. And this is the first episode. If you've read the title, you know that we're talking about Dumat and the First Blight today.
Yeah, so does that mean that our last one in this kind of series will be more of a Events of Veilguard? Or are we just going to go up to the 5th Blight?
No, we're definitely going to cover Razikel and Lusakhan and the 6th Blight. So it will be about the 6th Blight, the Double Blight, and Veilguard. But we're also going to bring in everything we know about Ghilanane, Elgar'nan, and their old gods, Razikel and Lusakhan. Everything we know outside of Veilguard too.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so are you ready to dive into Dumat?
I am.
Actually, I should say our fun facts before we get into Dumat. So, the first thing that I have to tell you, and this is probably going to spark some discussion, but this is that Andraste, yes, the Andraste, was born the same year that Dumat was slain.
Interesting.
I know that there's a very, very popular fan theory out there that says Andraste was an old god baby like Kieran, but with Dumat. And I think that theory is extremely compelling.
Yeah, it is really interesting and it is compelling. And it makes you wonder, like, because the calling itself, like if there was, and Kieran talks about like when Flimithal really kind of takes the old god stuff away from her, he says a remark of like, it's quiet now.
Mm-hmm.
Like he hears things and hears voices, which could explain, you know, the voices that Andraste hearing that she attributes to the Maker.
Exactly.
But it would be really interesting to me because, like, just with the new lore, it's like, what exactly are they purifying and absorbing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, if they ever made this canon, I would absolutely hate it if they just made it like, oh, yeah, the reason she thought the Maker and had all these visions of the Maker is really her connection to the rest of the old gods. I would hate that.
Me too.
I would hate that. So I will count our blessings of sometimes we just want a fan theory. So
yes.
Okay. My next fun fact is that folk legends in Thedas, so in universe, say that the ancient human kingdom of Barandur, which vanished around minus 1610 ancient, did so because they lost favor with Dumat. The legend holds that he destroyed the city when they turned away his high priest during the celebration of the winter solstice.
Interesting.
Now, I don't know if this high priest is Corypheus. I would assume not, just because we know that there's about 1,500 years or 1,400 years between Corypheus trying to ascend the Golden City and when Barandur vanished.
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably not him, but we also don't know anything about if the high priests of the old gods were longer lived because of that magic. We have no idea.
It's a mystery.
All right. So I do have a few more fun facts. So my next one is that according to Archon Thalcian, Dumat personally taught him blood magic, which to me sounds very like, we know Dumat couldn't have appeared in person. Like, it's not like they were having tutoring sessions, you know? So I'm just like, how did he personally teach you that? I want to know more information.
It's really interesting to me with that and the blood magic of, like, Dumat teaching that, because really now with the Veilguard, it's hard to say, is there a difference between like the blight magic that Ghilanane and Elgar'nan wield and blood magic? I mean, I guess like with humans, like there is an actual difference like in like what is used, but like is the concept the same between, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do hear you, because like the blight comes from Titans, right? But I think the difference is that it doesn't come from the blood of the Titans. It comes from the dreams, the disembodied dreams of the Titans. So I feel like that's distinct enough from like the actual physical blood of a human or an elf or even a dwarf, whomever, to say that yes, blight magic and blood magic are different.
And like, it just comes down to a point of like, if Dumat is teaching you blood magic, is it actually Dumat? Like the dragon thrall is teaching you blood magic, or has an Evanuris come and taught you blood magic?
Yeah, I don't know. And I mean, there's no way that he would know.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Before we get too deep in the theory, my last fun fact is that you can actually acquire a ton of different weapons, artifacts, and items that are affiliated with Dumat across almost every game. So in Awakening, you can find a dagger named Dumat's Claw. You can find a sword named Dumat's Spine, and both alleged to have been made from his bones. In DA2, you can find a Chain of the Penitent, which is a penitent of Dumat. Mm-hmm. And you receive this after completing the Altar of Dumat quest. And then in Tevinter Nights, there is an artifact named Dumat's Folly, which is actually said to be a piece of the Black City itself. The book says, quote, "A reminder of man's hubris and of the unique and glorious divinity of the Maker," end quote. And it's kept in the Archon's Palace in Minrathous. And I should also add, just to this fun fact, I've done the research for almost every other Old God, and none of them are as represented in the games as Dumat is.
Mm-hmm. And like, I think that the most represented gods in the games, in my opinion, the Evanuris are pretty, like, they all have pretty like equal standing. Obviously, a more information on Mythal, in there, but like the Maker, and then Dumat, like we know so much about Dumat, and the rest of them like are just kind of like, I feel like, are almost throwaway entries that you find like while you're looking in the deep roads, or you're in like random places of where the Imperium had been before.
Right. And I mean, the dwarves and the Qun, they don't really have gods in the sense that the rest of them do. So that's part of it. But I completely agree. Like, of all the old gods, Dumat is just the most, that we just have the most information about him. And, you know, once we get into the rest of the information that we have about Dumat, you're going to be like, really? Like, he's the one we know the most about? Because it's like a page of notes. Like, it's not a lot. So even then, there's still a lot we don't know. So let's get into Dumat. As you can probably imagine, since we're starting with Dumat, he was the first archdemon to awaken and is actually said to be the most powerful of all the old gods. And I do want to give you guys a sidebar here, because we are going to go by chronological order in Thedas history. So we're going to go with the first blight, and then the second blight, and the third blight. So it's going to be chronological. We're not skipping around. We're not going in order of power or devastation or anything like that. So this is the first one. It just so happens that he also is said to be the most powerful of all the old gods, which is interesting, because, you know, if any of the Evanuris, of the, you know, the members that make up the Evanuris are going to claim to be the most powerful, you'd think it would be Elgernon. Lusicon. Yeah, but maybe you can make the argument that, like, hey, maybe Elgernon is the most powerful Evanuris, but Dumat is the most powerful dragon thrall, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's a bit of a distinction that way. I don't know.
It makes me wonder, I know I don't remember what Balara's notes are, but it really makes me wonder if there is a connection between Andriel and Dumat, because she is, quote unquote, I think, because she has the story about like going into the abyss and kind of like bringing back the blight because of that. Like, is she one of the first Evanuris to really encounter the blight and deal with it? And that's why Dumat then is so powerful.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we know that Balara theorizes that Dumat is Durthaman. Which I don't necessarily have issues with that one. I know you guys, I've seen your comments. I know some of you have different interpretations than we do on who's who in the Dragon Thralls, and that's okay. We can all have our own interpretations. But just getting back to Dumat a little bit, because he's the first one to awaken, he's the one that ushers in the First Blight and the Age of Destruction that follows. And I should also say that he is affiliated with the Salintir constellation, as well as the holiday Funalis, which is now celebrated as All Souls Day. And if you're familiar with that holiday in our world, it's basically the same exact thing. Would you like to kind of explain what that is, Austin?
So like All Saints Day or All Hallows Day, which is preceded by All Hallows Eve. Halloween. So it's typically the 1st of November, around there. It's where you honor and acknowledge like the departed dead. And those who have died, typically those who have died in the past year. But its history kind of goes back to the belief that at this time, at like kind of like the fall equinox, the changing from, autumn to winter is when the veil between the living and the dead is the weakest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of think of it, if you're familiar with the Day of the Dead, too. It's a very similar holiday. A lot of times, I think All Saints Day and All Souls Day are mostly exclusively celebrated in like Christian Catholicism and like high church Protestantism. I don't necessarily think those are not cultural things in our culture anymore. So like the Day of the Dead and Halloween are both more cultural, even though Day of the Dead also has religious symbolism behind it. But anyway, so all of that is to say this holiday in Thedas is basically the same as it is here. So in line with Dumat being the first archdemon to awaken, he was also the first one to convince his followers, specifically the high priest, to breach the Golden City. And so, as we talked about last week, Corypheus/Sethius then convinced the rest of the high priests of the old gods to help him in this journey. So Dumat is really like leader of the old gods, even though he's not necessarily, as far as we know, Durthaman or whomever is not really the leader of the elven gods, but that's how it is. That's kind of how it is with the old gods, at least in how they've been interpreted in Tevinter history.
It just is also interesting to me, like the connection with Dumat and All Souls Day of like, would that not pair him then again more with Falun Den, since he has the connection to the departed and the dead? Though I wouldn't really call like Falun Den a god of the dead. Like maybe god of the dead, but he's not really like god of death.
Yeah, I mean, he's the closest thing they have to that, though. But I do agree with you. And in my hypothesizing, I did feel like Falun Den makes the most sense to be associated with Dumat, because Falun Den is the one of the Evanurists that they say leaves early, and that he is gone before the rest of them.
Right.
So I don't know. But that's headcanon. That's not in the lore. So, like we said, the Veilguard theorizes that Dumat is the dragon thrall of Durthaman, which is the elven god of secrets. And to be fair to the Veilguard and Balara, I can also see that. I don't think that that's an unfair interpretation, because like we find all these altars in the Deep Roads in Dragon Age 2 of Dumat, and that are very secretive, that are hidden away. And so I can understand that as well.
And like there's so much like conductor of the silent choir or whatever, like that
conductor of the choir of silence,
silent, like could that not be fancy secrets?
Absolutely. It is so we do have a few known priests and priestesses of Dumat. So the first is Calpurnia, and I want to give a disclaimer. This is not Calpurnia from Inquisition. Calpurnia from Inquisition is named after this Calpurnia. So this is an ancient Calpurnia, and she was a priestess of Dumat in Varantium in the Ancient Age. She was also the foster mother of Durinius, who was known as the Ferryman, or the first Archon and the founder of the Tevinter Imperium.
It's a big deal.
So the founder of the Tevinter's Imperium, his adopted mother was a priestess of Dumat. Mm-hmm. That the number 2 in command of the high priest of Dumat named herself after.
Yeah.
There's some connections there.
There are some connections there. And it's interesting, like, it's kind of like which came first. Like, did the high priest of Dumat get this position and whatever because Dumat was the most important? Or was Dumat worshipped as the most important because the first Archon had this connection to Dumat? Like,
great question.
Chicken or egg, really?
I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. But I mean, I do think it makes sense to me that I think that the worship of the old gods, like each old god is distinct enough that like we could kind of even separate that as an individual religion, but we have a tendency to lump them all together. But it makes sense to me that somebody who worships a god and is part of a religion that thinks so highly of themselves would then go on to do so much. It's kind of like Mormonism. You know, they have very high opinions of Joseph Smith and their heritage. And there are many, many Mormons who are extremely successful. Mm-hmm. Not that I think Mormonism is anywhere close to worship of the old gods. So if you're out there listening to me, I am not making that comparison, but it is similar in a way.
Right. And I think like a good way to like understand like the worship of the old gods and what Shelby said about like we could really consider each old god their own religion is kind of a difference. Like if you look at Greek mythology, like you pledged yourself, it really was more about worship than it was about belief, because now we talk about like, oh, I believe in God and that kind of stuff, but that wasn't really a conversation for these religions. It was more of which god do you give the most devotion to?
Right.
And people would choose and they would have their rituals and devotees. And like, there were people who were around like, okay, no, yeah, when I want fertility and stuff like that, like I will pray to, I forget who the Greek god of fertility is, but like you would, and like you need like help in your marriage or guidance in your marriage, you would pray to Hera because that's her domain. I don't know why, but
yeah, anyway.
But like when you consider that, then compare that to like Norse mythology, which is probably more where the Dalish view of the Evanuris is, in that like Norse mythology, they worship and honor all the gods, and there aren't really these, at least to my knowledge, if I'm wrong, someone will correct me. But to my knowledge, there aren't these like different sects. Like there's not a sect of Thor or a sect of Odin that rises up. There's more, it's a more holistic view of the pantheon versus like these different cults or sects that rise up.
Absolutely. I think that's fair. And I mean, I do think that most Teventers, like they would have acknowledged, yes, they all exist, just as the ancient Greeks would have. But I think that every Teventer family would choose one that they have the most affiliation with. So just going back to some few known priests and priestesses of Dumat, we also have somebody named Parthenius that we know who was a high priest of Dumat. And then, of course, as we talked about last week, there is Sethius Amladaris, also known as Corypheus, who was the magister who breached the Golden City along with the rest of them. And he was the high priest of Dumat during that time.
And it's interesting because, you know, kind of going to the Veil Garden, jumping ahead, like we do meet people who self-identify themselves as priest or priestess of different old gods. Like I'm pretty sure the big bad of Nev's story eventually comes out and says like, I am the priest of Lusicon.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that, but I'm sure that you're right.
So I just think that's interesting that like, and that's one thing that like is a point in the Veilguard is like this old god worship didn't disappear after the Blight. It might have fallen out of favor, but it did not disappear.
Right. Absolutely fair. Okay, so that's about all we have that we know of Dumat. There are, I'm sure, maybe a few things we've missed, but all in all, for the archdemon that's said to be the most powerful and most well known, that's not a lot of information, but that's all we've got. So unless you have any other things you want to add or talk about with this, I think we are ready to move on.
All right, well, let's do that.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
So good, so good, so good.
Get ready, because Clear the Rack is on at your Nordstrom Rack store. Now through Monday, find incredible deals on Wear Now styles. On sale for even less at Nordstrom Rack. Take an extra 25% off red tag clearance throughout the store from brands like Adidas, Marc Jacobs, Steve Madden, and more. All sales final. The best stuff goes fast. So shop this sale at Nordstrom Rack today. Please see NordstromRack.com or ask a store associate for details.
Hi, this is Javon, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep. I'm here to help with everything from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
No problem. I can even help schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Whatever you need.
So the first room we're looking at is for... Shop Blinds.com now and save up to 40% site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
I went to Kirkwall once.
Yeah?
Bit of a shithole.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, have you ever licked a lamppost in winter?
What do you think rooks like in person? Do you think they smell nice?
What is wrong with you? And have you forgotten which side you're on?
No. I mean, think about if we could turn them. Riding beside a rook at the head of Devinter's vast armies. I could stab them for you, on the house.
Okay, welcome to the middle of the show where we take time to thank our patrons. So thank you to all of our patrons who help support the podcast and do all of that. A special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. We have no new patrons to shout out, but when you join the Patreon, we will read out your name on the next episode after we're notified that you have joined. Also, a special thank you to our Nug King patron, Lewis H. Again, if you want to support us, you can do so on patreon.com/DALorecast. You can sign up at all kinds of tiers, get stickers, or come on the show with us and talk about our monthly patron chats, which will happen, or it will happen the day of the airing of this episode. Another great way to support us is to leave us ratings and reviews on Apple or Spotify. If you leave us 5 stars and some kind words, we will read it out on a future episode of the show. So this review comes from Jeremy T. And they say, your podcast has been a great thing to listen to while I travel. Has helped me stay interested in Dragon Age while waiting for the Veilguard to come out. An episode idea I think you guys should do is different power sources for magic, i.e. Fade, Blood, Blight, along with the schools of magic like Necromancy or Rift Magic. Keep up the good work. You make me glad to be a Dragon Age fan. Awesome. I think we briefly cover some of the schools of magic in, I think, our magic overview episode or our circle episode.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about blood magic and we've talked about like the circles and stuff, but we haven't really gotten into the schools of magic like Necromancy, Rift Mage, all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a possibility for future seasons of this show.
Yeah. And if you have a suggestion, you can leave that in a review, or you can join our Discord server and leave us all kinds of suggestions and comments there and talk about the games, talk about our other show, the Assassin's Creed Lorecast, or anything like that. Again, that Discord server's link is found in the episode description. I think that's all I have for the middle of the show.
All right, well, let's get back into it.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Don't Templars have anything better to do than come up with new ways to torment mages?
No. Again, I'm so sorry Manfred keeps wandering in while you're asleep, Lucanus.
I think he wonders about spite.
Curiosity has feet.
We have enough feet already.
It has feet.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is
All right, so now that we've covered Dumat, I want to take us into the events of the First Blight. And I do want to give a disclaimer. We know quite a bit about this first one, but I'm sure that there are still things we don't know. Like, we've never gotten a book like Last Flight on the other Blights. So, there may be other things we don't know. So just keep that in mind. Starting at the beginning, the First Blight started in force in -380 Ancient, when Dumat was said to awaken, and his Darkspawn horde attacked the Deep Roads. They soon spread elsewhere, but at first they were actually pretty subtle. Travelers started disappearing, patrols of Dwarven warriors also had gone missing, and there were no huge battles at first. But the First Blight would be disastrous for all of Thedas. However, it started with the dwarves. The Darkspawn quickly and easily tore through the Dwarven Empire and brought them almost to extinction. Remote Tigers were the first ones to fall, as they were completely unprepared for the vast numbers of Darkspawn that were emerging. These remote Tigers fell in a matter of days and were then turned into bases for the Darkspawn, which we've seen in the games, in all of the games except for Veilguard, I want to say. At this time, Orzammar was caught in the middle of a extremely bitter inter-house war, which, I'm sorry, Orzammar, get your shit together. Every time there's a threat from the Darkspawn, it seems like y'all are in the middle of a house war.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think, I know it makes good storytelling to have these other, plots and stuff, but the Blight happens at, a huge, politically, there's a lot of turmoil going on with the Blight finally happens.
In the Fifth Blight, you mean?
In the Fifth Blight, and sometimes even in other Blights, or there's a lack of faith in leadership. I'm thinking about in Last Flight, how much lack of faith really and lack of support the Antivan royalty have from the people.
Well,
in that.
And it's, deservedly so, because the Antivan royal family, in that one at least, they waited so long to do any evacuations that they doomed their people, and their people turned on them. Understandably and rightfully, some would say.
Yes, but it's just interesting to me. It's almost like cataclysmic event is ushered in with also political unrest, and even you could say there's not a lot of political unrest in Ferelden right before the Blight starts, but there's a lot of lack of faith in Caitlyn's leadership across the board.
Well, and then you have Logain, of course, who tries to hide it all. But I do think, just comparing this to our real world for a minute, I think that a lack of faith in a political leadership is always necessitated by something. You don't lose faith in your leaders for no reason. They do things that you disagree with, and a lot of times the things that make the news are things that are the lead-ups to war. Look at England and Germany in World War II. Look at Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah.
So I do think that when a political leader has lost all faith that their people had in them, usually that country is on a precipice of war.
Yeah, but I just think it's interesting. It makes good. Part of it is that if it was just like, okay, everyone's trying to unite against this threat, like it wouldn't make a very intriguing role-playing game to try to like pick sides.
Sure, absolutely. But like even the fact that it like goes into the history of the Dwarven Empire is like, oh, well, they've been doing the same thing for thousands of years. It's just funny to me because like they could have written this story, this codex entry any way possible. Like they could have written it as like, oh, they were just that overpowered. They were so that overwhelmed. But they chose to make it exactly like what Orzammar has been doing for forever. And so I just think that's funny. But getting into Orzammar's actual response a little bit. So basically what happens is they're so focused on this infighting, and specifically the Dwarven warriors are having a lot of infighting too. It's not just like the political leaders. It's the warrior caste. And the greatest of them were so focused on their infighting that they did not mount an organized defense of Orzammar until it was too late. By that point, each noble dwarven house was so deep in the infighting that they only cared about themselves. They didn't care about the good of Orzammar anymore, which makes me question like, okay, what happened to the casteless in this situation? But that's another whole other question. So the assembly, the political leadership, was so tied up with all of this disorganization and this infighting and selfishness that the Darkspawn were able to spread unchecked all the way to the gates of Orzammar.
It's really, really interesting to me with this, like the assembly not really being able to handle any of this, and like what's going to come next, like sets up almost them kind of like escaping this, or at least generally surviving this, sets up a dynasty of rulers in their city.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Which we'll get into really shortly. Actually, not shortly, right now. So Iduken takes control of this situation. And as Austin has said, if you are a Dwarven noble in Origins, you are an Iduken. And so they rule from the middle, beginning, whatever, the time of the First Blight until
the
Dragon Age, which is crazy. There's nobody else. There's nobody else in Thedas who's ruled that long. Nobody. Not even the Pentaghasts and the Van Markhams. Neither of them have ruled that long.
And Ferelden's not even that old. He's barely even that old.
No, Ferelden, the Therans are like pennies compared to this $100 bill.
And like this is an important point of like, and really sheds light into Orzammar, and like especially when you go there in the First Blight. Like it's why I say like I always take issue with the thing like, oh, Haremont is a traditionalist and Balin is like
the modern one.
The modern revolutionary, which like Balin does have modern ideas, but he is the tradition. Balin is an Iduken, and no matter what origin you play, he is the rightful heir to the throne. Like that is where it comes, because if you are an Iduken noble, you've been cast out.
Right.
Legally. So you have lost, and now you're a Grey Warden, and so you have lost any and all claim to the throne. So Balin is the rightful thing, and like Haremont is not an Iduken. So him taking the throne or to become king is a break of
a tradition that's 1,000 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because it's not as simple as like, oh, Balin is this upstart modern person and Haremont is this staunch traditionalist.
Right. Well, and I do think that that's just like the genius of Origins writing, truly. Because it is a good twist. But back to the original Iduken. So he takes control because he's apparently the only person who realized how dire this situation really is. And so he steps up and he leads the Dwarven armies. He calls upon the Smith caste to supply them. He enlists the mining caste to like collapse passages on the Darkspawn, all that kind of stuff. And in doing all of this, he completely bypasses the assembly and all of the fighting nobility. Eventually, after the First Blight, he is made paragon for his actions and becomes king and comes to father the line of Iduken rulers after him. The First Blight is also the origin of another very famous dwarf, and that would be Caridin himself. So in minus 255 Ancient, Caridin discovers the process of forging golems. This became the best weapon against the Darkspawn. But if you've played Origins, specifically Shale's DLC, you know that to create a golem, you need a living dwarf to volunteer for it. And so, as you can imagine, during the course of the Blight, there were fewer and fewer and fewer volunteers until the King Valtor, started conscripting the castless to become golems. And so, at this point, Caridin vanishes because he doesn't think this is ethical, because it's not ethical. It's not ethical to force somebody into a life, an eternal life of slavery. And so Caridin vanishes, and he takes the Anvil of the Void with him, just as the dwarves were starting to turn the tide against the Darkspawn.
Right, which is just so like ironic of like, would the First Blight have been, I mean, yes, we know this because of the lore. We know about archdemons, that even golems would not have been able to stop the archdemon.
Right.
But it's just really interesting to me because like Caridin takes such this, like, he knows the cost of what he has to do. It very much reminds me of like the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer, of like Oppenheimer is all about the Manhattan Project when we're fighting an evil that is as prominent as Nazi Germany and everything, and World War II, and this war that seems to gonna destroy everything. But the minute that the US government wants to start to use this as a means of control or a means against the downtrodden or whatever, and like with the rise of McCarthyism, Oppenheimer's like, no, like,
we can't do this anymore.
We can't do this anymore. And I feel Caridin is very much in the same lines of like, he did this because of the necessity of survival. But the minute that Valtor starts conscripting people, and it's even worse because he's not just conscripting random dwarfs. It's not a random thing. He is taking from the casteless, which are the bottom pecking order dwarfs. These are the poorest dwarfs, the homeless dwarfs, the ones who have nothing.
Yeah. Well, and I do think I have a couple things. I think that your comparison to Oppenheimer is very apt. And like Oppenheimer, I think Caridin, you get so focused when you're trying to accomplish something sometimes that you don't think about the implications of what might happen when you accomplish that thing. And I think that that's where Caridin is, and I think that's where Oppenheimer was. They were so excited to make this breakthrough in smithing and in bombs that they didn't think about what would happen if they succeeded. They could destroy the world. And so I think that it really says something about King Valtor, especially in the depths that he would go to, the depths of depravity that he would go to basically commit a genocide against the casteless, that Caridin thought that was more dangerous than the First Blight.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's significant.
It's very significant.
So while all of this is going on in the Deep Roads, the Darkspawn were also emerging on the surface and starting to do battle with the humans and some elves. They used the underground tunnels of the Deep Roads to travel basically to all quarters of the continent, but they focus at first in Tevinter. And so the armies of the Imperium, they try to fight them, but truly they just couldn't be everywhere at once. And so the hordes continues to rise across all of Thedas, and Tevinter, as a result, because Tevinter is very much like Rome, they're spread out everywhere, they have to turn more and more inward, leaving their far-reaching territories in order to fend for themselves and their traditional, quote-unquote, traditional lands, their more mainland of Tevinter. And so as a result, they eventually get to the point where they say, we have to protect Minrathous over everything else. And that's where they get to, which causes a lot of political instability with the people that are abandoned, as you can imagine. And so the blight continues, and as we know from what happens during a blight, the land starts to be affected too. It was sucked dry of moisture, which turned plants into dust, and the soil in many places actually turned black. The skies also filled with black clouds, and the sun even disappeared. And so disease and rot and all kinds of terrible things starts emerging all over Thedas. It wasn't until minus 305 ancient, which is about 75 years before the Wardens are founded. So they have 75 years of everything we've just talked about before they really get much hope at all. And so the Wardens are founded by 100%. They're all seasoned veterans from battles with the Darkspawn. So they all are good fighters against the Darkspawn. They have been in these battles before and know how to fight them. They were a mixture of humans, elves, and dwarves. No Qunari yet, as you can imagine. And so when they founded the Wardens, they forsook any political allegiance and all noble titles. And so that's kind of the basis of their founding. At this point, they build Weishaupt and they developed the joining ritual. And they fiercely battled the Darkspawn. They reclaimed lands and they built fortresses, and their reputation grew and grew and grew. Their first recorded battle was the Siege of Nordbotten. Accounts tell of griffins swooping into the ranks of Darkspawn, each facing at least 10 enemies at a time. They launched aerial attacks at the archdemon using spells and spears, and the battle was a significant victory in the First Blight, and actually became the turning point because it gave the people of Thedas hope for the first time in a very long time.
I want this story
so badly.
So bad. I want to know who these first wardens are. I want if it's an animated show, if it's a book, if it's a game or whatever, but I want to know about them. I want to know where they came from. I want to know where their allegiance is, what were their races. I mean, we know they were humans, dwarves, and elves, but these first wardens, the process of them coming together and saying
we have to do something.
We have to do that. We have to forget any alliance that we've had before this, and we have to fight together and do this.
Yeah.
After 75 years, we've had wars that last that long in the course of human history. Not many that last more than a couple decades. I'm thinking of the 100 Years' War as the one that comes to mind right now.
But I mean, if you really think about it, World War II is the most devastating war that people generally talk about in the past several hundred years, right?
It was a decade.
No, it was really 6 years. 1939 is the real official start. And yes, we had things that led up to it, but the 39 to 45. That's 6 years. That's not a long time. Can you imagine 75 years of World War II?
No, and it's even the 100 Years' War is it's not constant fighting. And you could say technically the Cold War lasts a long time, but again, it's not constant fighting. This is an apocalyptic event for 75 years.
Right. I don't really think we have anything in our understanding of history that can really and truly compare to how devastating this would have been. I mean, this is people were born in the First Blight, grew up, had children, married, families, and died
before it was over,
without knowing anything else for their whole entire life. And can you imagine just imagine that we're our age when the First Blight happens, middle age, whatever, 30s, 40s. And your children grow up and they have children and you're a grandparent and this thing is still going on and you're telling stories of your childhood to your grandkid and you're oh yeah, before the Darkspawn, and your kid's You're stupid. Like, there was no time before the Darkspawn. Nobody can imagine that. Like, that would be so crazy.
Yeah, so like it's just this thing of like, I'm telling you, BioWare, if you're going to still make content, like
this is a prime opportunity.
This is a story that I think people really want to know, and I think it's best told outside of a game, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that.
I just think that like it would be too repetitive of the other games, but getting this story of like who these people were and just kind of delving into the desperation, and I'm sure that there are people asking questions at this point of like, yes, most people are in things like we need to survive. But there are people who are asking, like, what is the precedent that we're going to set?
Mm-hmm.
Because decisions that are made after the time of the founding of the Wardens shape the rest of Thedas up until, 950 Dragon.
Yeah, that's very true. So let's get back into the rest of this Blight, because we do actually have a few more battles to talk about. So the Wardens are founded before the first slaying of Dumat. And we don't really know how they came up with the joining. Like, we don't really know how that was developed. So that's just something that is out there floating. But as we've discussed many times on the podcast before, Dumat was killed multiple times, twice. And that's because before he was killed the first time, they didn't know that he could return. And so a lot of people saw it as a sign of his divine power that he could return, even though the masses of the population were abandoning very quickly the worship of the old gods. But the Grey Wardens, since they were founded already by this time, they knew when he died and rose again because they could feel it. Thanks to their tainted blood, they knew that his spirit had gone on to possess another tainted creature, which also helped them realize that their connection to the Blight would make it possible to kill him permanently. And so after he dies the first time, obviously it's going to be devastating. And it's a horrible, like, oh my God, like, this is a hopeless feeling, but at the same time, it also inspires hope because it's taught them that he can be killed. It just has to be one of us that does it.
Mm-hmm. I really have a head canon that Mythal is the one who taught them the joining. I just think it's the only thing that makes sense to me of like who is around that we know, like who is around, because I'm pretty sure we don't know if Solus has entered Uthenera or not. We have no idea when he does that. So I think it's one of them. It's either the spirit of Mythal moving around and doing something, or it's Solus. Given that Solus has such a bitter distaste for the Wardens, I think it was Mythal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways they could take this, right? Like, Solus could have given them like something else and they misunderstood or didn't follow his instructions, and that's why he's so mad at them, Like, there's just a lot of different ways that they could take it. But I don't think this is as far-fetched as your Mythal is Arthemiel theory. So there's at least that.
But yeah. But I do think that like Solus, at least, like he would despise the joining. Just because everything that his regret teaches us is that he regrets anyone ever being allowed to use the Blight. And like I think of all the things he says us, the most honest thing that he says is that he hates the Blight.
Yeah.
And that he regrets the Blight.
Yeah, fair. All right, so let's get into the kind of final battles of the First Blight. So in -203 Ancient, the Wardens presented a solid wall of soldiers from Tevinter, the Dwarven Kingdoms, Ravain, and the Syrian tribes. So this is an army of people from all across Thedas. And in the battle, they did kill Dumat, and they routed the rest of the Darkspawn forces. A third of the armies fell in the battle, however. The Wardens had come to believe at this time that if a Warden struck the final blow against Dumat, then their tainted souls would destroy each other. We now know that it's more that the archdemon absorbs the tainted soul of the Warden and that prevents it from returning, but that's just things we know from time. But regardless, after this slaying of Dumat at the Battle of the Silent Plains, he did not return. The Horde, however, remained massive, and the battles to fight them continued. However, as we know from our Darkspawn episodes, without the Archdemon to lead them, they became extremely disorganized. And so they do get forced back underground. And so for the surface, the Blight was over. it had ended. But we know for the dwarves that it really was just beginning, which we're not going to get into on this episode, but Orzammar, they seal themselves off from Khal Sharrock and the other Taigs that have survived. They become isolated, and they have to fight the Darkspawn even still to the current age. And so this what has started in this First Blight continues for the dwarves until the modern day.
I think, there's something that either the Legion of the Dead members that you meet in Origins or the one you meet in Inquisition have a throwaway line almost that they're just like, you're talking about a blight. The blight never ended for us.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly it. It really doesn't. Because, yes, the horde decreases, but it never goes away completely, and the dwarves are the ones that have to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the results of this First Blight, because there are some big ones. Number one is that the Wardens use their victory to sign treaties with every nation in Thedas, ensuring their rights, solidifying authority, specifically the right of conscription. And then the other major result is that the Dwarven kingdoms, as we just were mentioning, are severely diminished. And really, it's only a couple generations that this blight had been going on. But King Threestone of Orzammar orders the Deep Road sealed, cut off from other kingdoms. And we know within a decade of the end of this blight, Hormak and Gundar had fallen. They received no word from Khal Sharrock, but we know from Veilguard that they did indeed survive, but Orzammar did not know this. And so that's kind of the two major lasting effects of this blight. And the end of it is that the Wardens, they get their treaties, and the Dwarven kingdoms are changed for forever.
Yeah, and I think that's why, the dwarfs, why the Legion, we know why the Legion of the Dead kind of develops, but I think that the fact that the Wardens kind of take this vigilance thing, and I mean, I think they do have a partnership with Orzammar, at least a partnership healthier than any other surfacer around. I think this is part of it, is they're like, you're going to go be vigilant? We're down here, we need you. And then the Wardens are like, well, we have to be ready for a blight.
Right. Well, and I do think that, and I don't know as much if this is Duncan's effect or just how they treat all Wardens, but I do think of all the origins, the one where Duncan is the most well received is in Orzammar.
And I think there is a thing of a respect between them, as they acknowledge that at least you're doing something. You all are plotting into the deep roads, because the war, as we know from later on, the Wardens are attempting to find out and know where these old god prisons are.
Absolutely, they are. Yes. So that's about all we have on the Dumat and the First Blight. So do you have any final thoughts before we get into our side character?
Just kind of the reiterating of we, as in our understanding of history and conflict, we really have nothing to compare this to. There is no way for us to conceptualize the destructive power that this would take. And so it's one of the reasons that when I talk about things that were done in the First Blight, or even any of the blights, it's hard for me to pass judgment on a lot of them, because I don't really have a frame of reference of what would this be like?
Right. It'd be like if we killed Hitler and then he rose from the dead.
Exactly.
I mean, truly. And there is no comparison for that. Yeah, we really just, I can't reiterate enough how much we don't have a comparison for this in modern history. And I do think that that's something that happens in fantasy a lot. We read these things about oh, this person's ruled for 1,000 years, or this family is ruled for 1,000 years, or oh, this war's been being fought for 100 years. And we don't really realize when we read that or hear that just how long that is.
To compare the Idukan, it would be like saying that the descendants of Charlemagne are still ruling England right now.
Yeah, I don't know enough about
the direct descendants. Well,
right, I guess that's fair. His great grandchildren, and you can trace it all. That's not how it works.
No, the House of Windsor has only really been ruling for.
Well, the House of Windsor is pretty German, actually.
But like they have only been ruling England for maybe 200 years, 300 years. Maybe.
I don't know exactly how long, but like it's interesting. This is so off topic, but like with the Windsors, like it's Diana's genes that have brought them, Lady Diana's genes that have brought them back into some of the older actually English families.
That is really funny. All right, well, let's get to, speaking of German, let's get into our side character.
Yeah, I'm sure if you're listening, you're like, what the hell does that mean? But our side character today is a Grey Warden named Christoph, which is a German name. And so he is a Grey Warden that you can kind of encounter in Awakening. And I say kind of because we'll get into that. If you haven't played, you're going to be super confused by this. But let me just get into his backstory. So essentially, he was recruited into the Order just a few years before the events of the Fifth Blight, and was stationed in a stronghold in Jader, Orlais, which is actually the closest Orlesian city to Ferelden. And his father was also a warden, which usually being a Grey Warden is not something that is like inherited, like you like your son and their son and so on and so forth. Like usually that's not a family thing. So this is kind of an unusual situation.
Right. And it makes me wonder, like, did his father join after Christoph was born, or like is this one of those rare, because I know that like the taint doesn't make them completely infertile. It just is very, very unlikely.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we have the information in the lore to know whether Christoph or the joining came first. We don't know. But Christoph does appear in a canonical
question mark,
somewhat unknown canon status YouTube series named Warden's Fall, where he is seen tracking down bands of Darkspawn. He is then sent on another task to investigate a massacre in Amaranthine, where he eventually ends up in the Black Marsh. When we pick up in the DLC, one of the main quests is to look for Christoph, and you find him in the Black Marsh, going back to that YouTube series. However, he has since died. He is no longer living. He had faced down a group of Darkspawn that are affiliated with the Mother, but was eventually executed by her awakened Herlock the First. When you enter the Fade during the game, Christoph's body and spirit, I guess, is transported there as well, and he becomes embodied by a spirit of justice. So this is really Justice from the game, not Christoph, which is the Justice that will go on to possess Anders. And so at some point after the end of the game, we don't know all the details, but the Spirit of Justice releases Christoph's body and goes on to possess Anders. I assume because Christoph's dead body is rotting and Justice doesn't want to possess it anymore. But we don't really know the full details of that. You can meet his wife, who, if she sees his corpse just running around with you, she will freak out.
Naturally,
I would do the same. But I should also say notably that his appearance in the web series and the DLC is very different, which is so Dragon Age, let's be real. He has hair in one, is bald in the other, a scar goes missing, and there's some other stuff. So like you probably wouldn't even recognize him. But yeah, that's pretty much all we know about Christoph. He is was a former Grey Warden. We don't know a ton, but he is the one that gives us justice. And it's just an interesting little coincidence there.
Yeah, I don't have much to say because I haven't finished Awakening or met Christoph. I obviously know Justice.
Well,
but,
then how do you know Justice if you haven't met Christoph?
Because I've met Justice in Dragon Age 2.
Fair. Okay, sorry.
It is interesting to me about like the possession of the corpse. Because like Grey Wardens, inherently have this strong sense of justice. So I could see how a spirit of justice would be attracted to the Grey Wardens.
Absolutely.
And it's just really interesting to me because based on Anders' short story, the way I see this going down is Anders talking to Justice while possessing Kristoff's body and just being like, yo, like, come possess me because together we can have justice for mages.
I don't know. I don't think Anders would have initiated that.
You think it was just... I mean, I think that Justice would want a live host just based on what we know about spirits, and they crave that emotion. Absolutely. And that all that, like a dead corpse is not going to give them that satisfaction that they need.
Right, absolutely. I think that's totally fair. I think that both Anders and Justice did not fully realize how much it would change both of them for Justice to possess a live person. Because to be fair, we don't know if Kristoff is the first person Justice has possessed. I assume it is. But like, okay, you're possessing a dead body. A dead body doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have thoughts. There may be some lingering memories and stuff. But like, there is no emotions that, get Justice riled up with Kristoff. Whereas when he embodies Anders is nothing but emotion, especially with his state. And so I can see how that would be very difficult for Justice to go from Kristoff's corpse to Anders.
And I think that's part of the reason why like Anders doesn't turn into like a full like possessed abomination. Like most of the time we know like when someone is possessed, it's a wrestle, like either the spirit or the individual wins out. But like Justice and Anders exist in almost whereas when in the spirit of faith, I would say exist in a symbiotic relationship, Justice and Anders exist in a parasitic or almost if there is a version of where neither benefit.
Well, I mean, I do think that with Wynn, like, she dominates the spirit that's in her. And the only time she lets it out is when she lets it out or when basically like she's gone unconscious. Whereas with Anders, Justice comes out when he is so emotional that he can't control it anymore. So he's trying to dominate Justice, but he fails when he gets too emotional, which is real. Whereas with Kristoff, it's Justice the whole time because he's dead.
Right. And I have noted that people talk about the stark change that you have of like when you talk to Justice possessing Kristoff's body, like the Justice you encounter in DA2 is almost unrecognizable.
Yeah. That's fair. They are very different. And we do always talk about Anders changing, right? But Justice does too.
And Anders even says that, like, he says exactly what you said almost, like neither of us really understood what would happen when we do this. And this morphs Justice into a spirit of vengeance. So I don't have a lot to say. Like, I don't feel like I know Kristoff enough or Justice Kristoff enough to like say like, oh, this is why I love or hate this character. But I do think that the introduction of Justice and Anders and Kristoff like bring in a lot of important context into Dragon Age. Like they might seem like Kristoff might seem like this one-off character that we can write off, but he plays a pivotal role in the story because Justice has been on Earth probably longer than he should have been.
Exactly. And I do think, just we can leave it at this, I don't think you can fully understand Anders' story without understanding Kristoff's story.
I agree.
Well, that's about all I have for today's episode.
That's all I got.
All right.
Oh, that's a me job. But anyway, so thank you so much for bringing this research for this excellent episode. Thank you all for listening to Dragon Age Lorecast. A special thank you to our Nug King patron, Lewis H., who gets thanked at the end of every episode. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DA Lorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
When a wasteland detective and a vault girl cross paths, no criminal is safe.
You're both under arrest.
Don't move a muscle if you know what's good for you.
Based in Bethesda's Fallout series, follow Walter and Bunny as they traverse the Texas Commonwealth and New Vegas, busting big crime rings.
We'll need all we can to expand into Vegas territory.
And surviving anything the wasteland can throw at them.
It's him! It's the Mothman!
Featuring a series of nail-biting narratives and guest stars from across the Fallout community. It's anybody's guess what thrilling case is up next.
War never changes, does it, Bunny?
No, it certainly does not.
True Vault Escapades, a Fallout audio drama. Available anywhere you get podcasts.